Chapter 1. The Shop at the Edge of Town. No one really noticed the little shop on Willow Street. It was the sort of place that you could walk past 100 times and never see until, one day, you did. It sat between a bakery that smelled of sweet bread and cinnamon and a hardware store that seemed permanently stuck in the 1970s. The shop's sign was simple: Timekeepers. The lettering was painted in gold, but not fresh gold. It had that mellowed, weathered look, as if it had been there for 50 years and had stopped trying to impress anyone. Inside, the air was cool, tinged with the faint metallic scent of brass and the subtle oiliness of polished wood. Clocks lined the walls, grandfather clocks with tall, solemn faces, tiny travel clocks in cracked leather cases, and round wall clocks whose ticking blended into a soft chorus. Behind the counter stood a man who looked as though he'd been standing there since the first clock was invented. He was not old in the way of age, but in the way of patience. His hair was silver, his waistcoat buttoned neatly, and his hands moved with a measured slowness as he adjusted the pendulum of a clock that stood nearly as tall as he did. It was on a rainy Tuesday afternoon that Elena stepped inside. She had been caught in a sudden downpour without an umbrella, her errands abandoned in favor of shelter. When she opened the door, a small brass bell chimed, a sound so delicate it felt as if it might evaporate into the air. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet weight as the clock's. Elena glanced around, momentarily forgetting the rain. "You have so many," she murmured. "They keep me company," he said simply. "Some have been with me a long time, some just arrived." Her gaze landed on a peculiar clock sitting on the far shelf. It was a tabletop piece, no taller than a teapot, with an ornate brass frame and a glass dome over its face. Its hands were moving, not forward, but backward. "Is that broken?" she asked, pointing. The man's eyes softened. "Not broken, different."
Chapter 2. A Clock Unlike Any Other. Elena stepped closer, drawn to the strange clock. The numbers were arranged normally, the way they should be, but the second hand swept counterclockwise, followed by the minute hand, then the hour hand. It wasn't chaotic, it was precise, smooth, as if it had always been meant to do so. "How does it work?" she asked. The man's lips curved slightly, not quite into a smile. "It works the same way any clock does, but instead of showing you what comes next, it shows you what has passed." "That doesn't make sense," Elena said, though her voice was quiet. He shrugged gently. "Does time always make sense to you?" She wanted to say yes, but she thought of all the moments she wished she could return to. Childhood summers by the lake, the sound of her grandmother's voice, the warmth of hands she no longer held. "Do you sell it?" she asked after a pause. "I could," the man said, "but you should know, it doesn't tell time in the way you expect, and sometimes, when you keep it, it begins to change other things." Chapter 3. The Purchase. It wasn't her intention to buy anything that day. She had only wanted to escape the rain. But when she left the shop, the backward clock was wrapped in brown paper, tucked under her arm. Her apartment was quiet when she returned. She set the clock on the windowsill above her writing desk, its gentle backward ticking oddly comforting. At first, it was just a curiosity. She would glance at it in the evenings and notice how, instead of chasing the next moment, it seemed to give each one back to her. She found herself sitting longer with her tea, rereading old letters she hadn't touched in years, calling friends she hadn't spoken to in months. And then small things began to happen. One Thursday morning, she woke to find that the jasmine plant she had neglected for weeks was blooming again, white flowers opening in the early light. The following Sunday, she pulled her favorite sweater from the wardrobe and realized it no longer had the small hole near the cuff. It was as it had been years ago. Chapter 4. Back to the beginning. The more she kept the clock near, the more she noticed the world behaving differently. Not in grand leaps, but in quiet reversals. A chipped mug became whole again. A forgotten melody returned to her fingers when she sat at the piano. One evening, she placed her hand on the clock's glass dome, and the ticking seemed to sink into her skin. A memory surfaced. Herself at 10 years old, sitting in the kitchen while her grandmother taught her how to braid bread. The smell of yeast and rosemary filled her senses as if it were happening now. In the weeks that followed, she began to keep a notebook. In it, she wrote the things that had come back. A photograph that had been lost inside a drawer. A taste she thought she'd forgotten. A friendship rekindled after years of silence. And yet, she couldn't shake a question. If the clock gave back what was lost, where did it take her? Chapter 5. The Man's Warning. One afternoon, she returned to the shop. The rain had come again, as though it followed her whenever she needed to see him. He was winding a tall grandfather clock when she entered. "You've noticed," he said, without looking up. "Yes," Elena replied. "It's giving things back to me, but I don't understand how." The man rested his hand on the clock's polished wood. Time doesn't only move forward. Memory, love, regret, they all move differently. The backward clock doesn't control time. It listens to it, and sometimes it listens to you. She hesitated. "Is there a cost?" He finally met her gaze. Everything has a cost, even remembering. Chapter 6. Choosing the Moment. Over the next months, Elena's life began to feel both fuller and stranger. She walked the streets of her city and noticed old shop fronts reappearing where modern cafes had been. A park bench she remembered from her teenage years was suddenly back in its original spot, the wood unweathered. One night she dreamed she was standing in her childhood home, her parents' voices drifting from the kitchen. She woke to find the smell of her father's coffee in the air, though he had passed away years ago. The clock's ticking was slower now, heavier. She understood, without knowing how, that it was offering her something final, the choice to step fully into a moment she had lost. But to take it, she would have to leave the rest behind. Chapter 7. The Last Tick. On the evening she decided, she made herself tea, lit a candle, and sat before the clock. She thought of all she had been given back, the warmth, the laughter, the fragments of a life she thought gone forever. Then she thought of the people she still loved here, in this present. Her fingers brushed the glass dome. The ticking slowed to a single beat, then another. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, but I'll stay." When she opened her eyes, the clock was still. Its hands were fixed at a time she did not recognize. She left it on the windowsill, where it became simply another clock among the many in the world. But sometimes, when the wind shifted just so, she swore she could hear it tick, not forward, not backward, but in the quiet space between.